a groundbreaking year regarding the DPRK's diplomacy, Kim Jong Un, the paramount leader of the DPRK, goes into 2019 with the momentum to build on last year's progress. South Korea drops its reference to the DPRK as an enemy in the latest defense white paper for the first time since 2010. Meanwhile, it's speculated that the second Trump-Kim summit is imminent with a possible location in Vietnam, which was suggested by the U.S. as a role model for the DPRK. So what can we expect in inter-Korean relations going forward? Will Trump and Kim take practical steps towards denuclearization and usher in a new era for the Korean Peninsula? And how likely is it that the DPRK will follow the proposed Vietnamese path? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Jong Un, Vice President of China Institute of International Studies, and Anna Tangen, author and columnist. We shall also cross live to Shane Ham, CGTN correspondent in Seoul, as well as Dr. Tim Beale, Chairman of New Zealand DPRK Society in Wellington. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. What do you think of the change of the wording from enemy to something that might be more acceptable to the DPRK? Do you think this indicates the beginning of a series of thaw in the strategic relationship between the two Koreas?
Well, indeed, I think it's a very positive development. At least I think rightly reflects the changing dynamic and the improving relationship, inter-Korean relationship. Remember, I think the defense, the paper issued by Defense Ministry has been on the question of the wording or how to define. North Korea has been undergoing several rounds of changes. Back in 2000, I think the 1990s, there were times that DPRK was specifically defined or designated as an enemy or as a major threat for our case security. Then the relation was improved that then they changed the wording to replacing the word enemy. And then after 2000, up to 2010, and after 2010, the relationship deteriorated again. The China incident, the shelling, and others. Then again they pick up the word again. So this time, I think the change of wording does reflect the reality where both the DPRK and RK, the inter-Korean relationship, particularly the military relationship, is undergoing positive changes.
I think I would agree with a lot of that in terms of the statement of history, but we have basically three positions that have been put together. One is the U.S. position, which says that the DPRK has to get rid of everything before there is any kind of progress towards economic help. The South Korean, which says there's got to be some sort of engagement, but I think the main thing there, and I don't know if you agree with me, is this idea of a peace treaty. Finally getting to the point where you can sign something declaring that there's peace between these people, and I think this is part of that. And then you have the DPRK, which I think is, at this point, interested in seeing economic sanctions lifted as part of a total package which would denuclearize the entire peninsula.
Thank you so much. Let me cross over to Shane, our CGTN correspondent in Seoul. Hello, Shane. Do you think the change of the wording in the defense white paper indicates a change in sentiments in South Korea or its policy towards the Pyongyang?
Well, without a doubt, from the perspective of the Moon Jae-in administration, it is a reflection of its policies in engaging the DPRK. If you want to talk about how it's accepted here as a whole, of course, it is a divisive issue here in South Korea. The conservatives here will say that this is a very significant move to replace this term enemy in the defense white paper, saying that it could weaken the nation's military posture, including troop morale and discipline, perhaps. But if you go back in history, South Korea has published nearly 24 of these white papers, and it's important to understand why this is so. It's to really show transparency in the government, and we've seen it being changed as administrations change from conservative to liberal here in in South Korea. But it is, you can call it a symbolic move, but if you look at other changes that have been made in last year's Defense White Paper, there are these terms, the kill chain strike platform that South Korea has in case of a possible nuclear strike from the DPRK. That's been omitted from this recent white paper, as well as what is known as KMPR, the Korea Massive Punishment and Retaliation, a plan to possibly incapacitate DPRK leadership in case of conflict. So these are very significant moves, but not unexpected from this administration.
What about the fanfare, deafening fanfare of the loudspeakers across the 38th parallel on both sides to reduce the propaganda tensions? Have you undertaken any latest moves to build the trust by removing some of the loudspeakers that delivered many propaganda messages?
Also that's another example of these two sides moving towards this peace regime, as the Moon administration likes to call it. That's a very significant move from a military standpoint. We've seen possible ties from both humanitarian, economic standpoint, but one of the panelists there mentioned these economic sanctions are a big hurdle and obstacle that stands between the two sides in moving much more forward in terms of engagement on an economic level, which is very important as well. And a big obstacle because of these sanctions, a lot will really rely on what comes in this possible Trump-Kim summit that many are expected to be coming in the next coming weeks or months, perhaps.
Thank you so much, Shane. I'll get back to you with more questions on the rapprochement in this process of denuclearization between the two Koreas. But let me go to Dr. Beale in Wellington.
Yeah.
What do you think of the current momentum that is built on the progress achieved last year in 2018 between the two Koreas? Do you think the two leaders, Mr. Moon Jae-in and Mr. Kim Jong Un, are ready to move forward before Mr. Kim Jong Un actually meets with President Donald Trump, possibly in a location like Hanoi of Vietnam?
Well, obviously there is a lot of movement. There is certainly a desire from Moon Jae-in to progress things. You were talking a moment ago about the change in the white paper, the deletion of the term main enemy. I think Moon has a very difficult balancing act. He has to balance against the South Korean military. Of course, they've got a lot of reason to continue the present situation. So they're not going to be too happy with moves towards détente. And of course, he's got the Americans who are not happy either. But he's very constrained in what he can do, or he thinks he can do. And a lot will perhaps hinge on the forthcoming Kim-Trump summit, if that comes off.
Thank you, Dr. Bill. Mr. Rong, why nothing substantial has been achieved on the ground, despite several visits by Secretary Pompeo and the current media fanfare that President Kim Jong-un will probably meet with his American counterpart, President Trump? How difficult is this process?
I think the difficulties we are having and the problems, the process that are being, again, faced up is largely expected. Because
what are they? What are the remarkable obstacles?
Leads, of course, the technical level. It leads to be the interpretation or different interpretation of the wording, like the denuclearization, like there are a lot of technical.
What does America actually want for the denuclearization?
The American
CVID, of course.
Yeah, of course, something like CVID or the complete denuclearization. If we're referring to the Singapore Declaration. But the fundamental issue is, as always, look at the process of the talks between DPRK and the U.S. and the nuclear talks is always the trust issues.
Exactly, it's an issue of trust. And very quickly, what do you think should become first? lifting the economic sanctions imposed by the United Nations, of course, is proposed by the United States, or the DPRK should be the first to blink by openly announcing a serious beginning of denuclearization, meaning to get rid of all of the nuclear weaponry.
Well, I'm going to agree to say that the first thing is a peace treaty. You can't have nations at war that are doing it. The second move is there has to be some understanding of this in-between world. The U.S. says get rid of everything. Obviously, the DPRK is not, because it's their only leverage. So there has to be some sort of plan over time to say, here are the milestones that we're going to have, and here's the carrot and here's the stick. If you meet these milestones in terms of doing something on the nuclear front, there will be something that is given on the sanctions, reducing them.
Thank you so much. Shane, are you with us? My question is, do you think the United States stands ready to really get the peace treaty signed? Because there have been allegations that the United States actually shows more interest in keeping the hot potato alive, in keeping this picture of hostility alive, so that the formidable military presence, the forward military presence of up to 700,000 could be, or 70,000 could be justified in Northeast Asia. What do you think of this kind of allegation?
Well, the main concern about possibly a peace treaty would be the eventual movement or the removal of U.S. Forces here stationed on the Korean Peninsula, a move that many here see could be very threatening, in fact. But as far as the Trump-Kim summit and a possible peace treaty being signed here, I think President Trump has a lot more to lose if there's no real substantive results that come out of this possible next meeting between Kim Jong Un and President Donald Trump there as well. So President Moon here has responded to numerous questions about a possible peace treaty. He's responded by saying, essentially, between Seoul and Pyongyang, there is a peace treaty, but we all know that the Korean War ended with that armistice signed by not just the two sides, but with the United States and China involved as well. And he's made it very clear that any peace treaty would not involve immediate removal of U.S. forces here in Korea, because those are two separate issues. That would be an issue between Seoul and Washington under the Seoul-Washington alliance there as well. So President Moon has made it a clear point that that is not something that people would need to worry about of a peace treaty of these U.S. forces being taken away from this region.
The next issue is whether war game will continue as what we had previously. You are watching Dialogue with Mr. Rong Ying, Anna Tangen, Dr. Tim Bill, and our CGTN correspondent Shin Ham in Seoul. We're discussing latest development in the Korean Peninsula and whether a second Kim-Trump meeting will take place, perhaps in Hanoi. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back, gentlemen. How likely do you think the DPRK will follow the example of Hanoi's reform? Because, you know, Secretary Pompeo may have suggested clearly to the paramount leader, Mr. Kim, look, you need to learn from, not necessarily China, because, you know, the current geopolitical tensions between the two biggest economies, but maybe to draw inspirations from Hanoi, where serious reforms are being undertaken by the Vietnam Communist Party, or Vietcong, despite the rivalry that we had during the Vietnam War in the 1960s.
Well, I think it has been clear, and from the statement, and I think the steps taken by the DPRK, that they have already made the decision to shift its focus, a kind of strategic focus towards economic development. It has made the decision by the third plenary session of the 7th Party's Congress. And then it's been repeated again and again. And during the latest visit to China, and Chairman King again made it very clear that they will continue this policy, and which was again received wide applaud and by the Chinese, which also declared that it would resolutely, strongly support the DPRK's efforts in this regard. And the question of which model DPRK will follow, I think definitely it will draw aspirations and learn experiences from China, from Vietnam, and other countries that have been undergoing transition. But I would argue that possibly the DPRK will do their own model. Firstly, because they have a strong sense of nationalism, they always emphasize the Juche ideology. And secondly, I think there are many differences despite the fact that there are similarities and that. But all in all, I think as far as the Chinese are concerned, and also as the international community as a whole, are very much hopeful and supportive that they will continue to succeed and they will succeed.
Yeah, the issue here is they need outside investment. This is, in essence, a third world country once you get outside their two main cities. How they're going to pull those off is very difficult, because remember, they've been a hermit kingdom for a long period of time, and some of the propaganda within the country has been that the rest of the world is, we may be suffering, but the rest of the world is suffering worse. I think there's a little bit of a gap between the rhetoric and the reality there. So I don't see them just opening up the doors and saying, look, let's have free internet and people can call around and travel. I think there will be a very, if at best, a very gradual opening up.
Shane, what do you make of the so-called Vietnam model? Do we have such a thing like a model of development or political reform in our neighboring country of Vietnam?
Yeah, I'd have to say, first of all, well, in terms of Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's comments on that the Vietnam model could be something that the DPRK could model itself after, you have to understand the context of why he would say that. But the Korean people are very proud people, and the Juche ideology of self-reliance is something that is deeply embedded in the DPRK leadership there in the nation. So as far as what sort of model to model after, it probably would be a little bit of the Chinese model, the Vietnamese model, etc. But South Korea, of course, has a very big potential opportunity for economic engagement with the DPRK, and really the Moon administration right now is laying the groundwork for all of that, and starting with the very basics of infrastructure in terms of railway, roads. President Moon has touted the linkage of the Trans-Siberian Railway through to the Korean Peninsula. That would be a win-win not just for the DPRK, but also South Korea, which would connect a lot of the logistical transport hubs all the way to Europe, which right now South Korea is cut off from because of the divided peninsula. So the last Inter-Korean summit in Pyongyang, we saw the delegation that traveled with President Moon included all of South Korea's top conglomerate leaders, including the leaders of Hyundai and Samsung along there as well. So right now, I mentioned the sanctions that are the obstacle, but the economic potential there is so great, and it's so numerous that it really is hard to gauge at this point what model the DPRK could model itself after economically.
Tim, before we talk smart about the Vietnam model, if any, obviously a lot needs to be done to lay the groundwork for drawing inspirations or lessons from the neighboring countries where reforms are obviously gaining momentum, such as in the DPRK, for example, how to take a second look at the military first principle that's been established since perhaps day one of the founding of the DPRK. With the end of the Second World War, military always comes as the first in terms of the budget as well as mobilization of the national resources in the DPRK. How difficult will it be for Mr. Kim Jong Un to really change this time-tested principle?
Yeah, personally, I think all this talk about models is beside the point. If the political framework, the international political framework is sorted out, then the economics will follow. It's not, I don't think we should get distracted by this talk of models. If we have a more benign international environment, then all these other things are possible. But unless that happens, as long as we get the present situation with sanctions, with military threat, etc., etc., we're not going to get we're going to get continued deep control in North Korea, obviously. But the North Korea has been very anxious, for instance, for foreign investment for many years. If you go to Korea, as I've been, you go to factories and they're very anxious to get foreign investment. That has never really been the question. The problem is that because of American policy, they can't get the investment. So if we get a change in American policy, if we get a peace regime on the peninsula, in the region, then these things will follow. We don't know exactly how they're going to happen, but they will follow.
Entirely correct. I mean, the sanctions were approved at the UN. There have been incidences involving other countries in the area, Japan, South Korea, etc. Remember, a year ago, what we're talking about here was not possible because North Korea's the whole situation, their whole PR was quite damaged. Now, a year later, I mean, Young Kim has emerged the master of the game, at least in terms of changing the perception of people about him. But, you know, this idea that somehow changing the international, I don't know what that means. We're talking chicken and egg, and which comes first. For the U.S. side, it says denuclearization. For the North Korean side, it comes down to sanction relief. And how do you get those things? I think there has to be very, very concrete steps, a timetable, talking about pulling back, only having defensive capabilities. There has to be verification. China has to be part of this. The U.S., I cannot ever see a time when the North Koreans are saying to the U.S., we throw open our doors, wander around our country, and see if we have any kind of nukes. I just can't see that happening. So China would probably be the third party, the trusted party, the one he turns to in terms of strategy. And this is the realities of what we're talking about when we get down to details. What my colleague has said, this is all in the details and how you manage expectations within them.
We haven't talked about Russia and the role Moscow could play in shaping the future of DPRK as well as the Korean Peninsula. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will soon visit Moscow to address the issue of the northern islands. Hopefully a peace treaty could be signed. The issue is whether a military base would be established by the United States in one of the 4 northern islands. Having said this, President Putin will never be silent, will never be quiet in playing an international game, and therefore the DPRK could be one of the things, if not a pawn, in the game. What do you think of, say, the security assurance that Mr. Kim Jong Un could enjoy despite the nuclearization itself that might be used to protect the security of this regime? Now, other than this, what do you think of the feeling of being secure before seriously addressing the issue of economic reform in the DPRK?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think if you look at the Singapore joint statement, it's very clear that we have a trade-off between the complete pledge from DPRK towards complete denuclearization to the security guarantee provided by the Trump administration. And remember, I think DPRK certainly have good friends, have neighbors like China, Russia, and others, and which presumably they will be able to provide, or some kind of security. But the security threats or the threat would have to be addressed by the United States.
Excuse me, when you say China is one of the friends for the DPRK, there have been allegations that they don't trust China. The North Koreans don't trust China. Anna,
well, it's not about trust, but there's a divergence of interest. China cannot accept a nuclear arms race throughout Asia. And therefore, having a nuclear-armed North Korea long-term is not in their best interests. So it's not hate. There's just simply distrust over which set of priorities are going to be there. If China is able and Russia are able to offer the security guarantees, I think that's part of the process.
For example, Mr. Rong, to take a second look at what I call the mistrust. It's not what I call. The media may describe the real relationship between the DPRK and China as a trust deficit. Now, the issue is China has joined the United Nations in calling for economic sanctions, following the nuclear tests one after another, or missile tests, or whatever you like. And the DPRK complains bitterly that China went as far as to support legally binding economic sanctions of the United Nations, and therefore they don't quite trust China, which, however, signed a mutual defense treaty in the early 1960s to sort of regard our DPRK neighbor as an ally. There's a lot of ambiguity
ally,
here.
or was it a defensive pact against aggression by the U.S. at that time? I don't know if that's the right characterization. They are in a situation where they were pushing their nuclear program. China, on many occasions, warned them not to do that.
My question for Mr. Rong is, in the policy box, there are many tools, of course, to be employed by Beijing in addressing an increasingly hostile Washington that takes China as a public enemy #1 strategically. So what do you think of China might play a game, sorry for saying this, by getting close to the DPRK and saying we no longer respect the United Nations economic sanctions, so we could help DPRK open up and start the process of economic reform?
Well, I think time has changed, and time is changing. We are not living in the Cold War anymore. We don't have a kind of a situation where we have to have two opposing camps. That is, say, your enemy's enemy is my friend. And I think in the case of the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, China's position has been very clear. China upholds the denuclearization of Korean Peninsula.
We support the denuclearization.
That's right. They support the denuclearization and pursue, and also, support the political settlement, the process of the question of Korean Peninsula. That has been consistent. This has been very clear, and that is exactly why there are differences between China and DPRK and the question of how to pursue the denuclearization. And the big difference or big changes in recent years in terms of relationship is that DPRK has pledged repeatedly on the face of China when the Chairman King came that DPRK continue to uphold, continue to pursue the denuclearization, which is, I think, a position that China supports. But of course, how to pursue, implement that thing, that would go along a lot of things, and it largely, will involve the United States and the other parties that have been concerned. So for China, I think China has been very clear that it will support the DPRK's decision, strategic shift towards economic growth, but that China does not support DPRK's sort of pursuit of nuclearization, and that's why when they say they pledged, we support that. But how to implement this is a big question. And I'll come back very quickly about the model things. And I think if you look at the DPRK's situation, there are two different things with vis-a-vis Vietnam and China. And internationally, I think in case of China, when China decided 40 years ago to pursue reform and open up, the international environment is in changing, particularly vis-a-vis the United States, China-U.S. relationship, the diplomatic relationship. Vietnam is more or less the same. But here, this exactly, makes DPRK feel very insecure because it has not yet secured a stable or normal relationship with the United States. Without that, it would not be able to pursue its economic development, even though it has made a decision. That's why I think we have to put it in this context.
But you're forgetting the nuclear part here. There can be no stable relationship with the U.S. as long as they have nukes.
Without normalizing the relationship with Washington, they wouldn't have the free flow of labor resources across the 38th parallel, to say nothing of getting rid of the mines in their thousands around the DMZ between the two Koreas. Obviously, this is a long journey. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.